Thank you, Greg. And Andy, it's so great you've come to Toronto tonight to talk with us all. And I know you've got an interest in Canada and Canadian companies. So why don't we start there? Why your interest in Canada?
Well, I mean, and by the way, if people can't hear, just raise your hands and we'll try and project our voices in different areas. And so I don't think that, we don't have any particular interest in Canada per se, but it's a short flight from New York. We can clear customs here before we get to New York, right? That's an added benefit.
It's convenient.
Yeah, it's convenient. And we've invested in 3 companies that are in and around Toronto, and they're all really good companies. So there's something about some of these companies that's attractive to us being a thesis-driven firm. And also, we like to invest in places that maybe other U.S.-based investors aren't looking as hard. Maybe there's a little advantage for us in that.
And Figure One, seeing we're here today, what was your particular interest in them as a company?
You know, Figure One, we were talking about this earlier. Figure One was one of these ideas that the moment that we heard about it, like our reaction was like, why either did we not think of it, but we're not good at that, so we don't, or I can't believe no one's thought of this before. It was like immediate reaction. Why wouldn't you create a platform for medical professionals to share with each other that's on a mobile device? It just seemed so obvious. And also it seemed very obvious that was the type of company that our firm could help potentially. It was very relevant to some of the things that we've done or the ways that we think. So I reached out to these guys on Twitter, actually, because I didn't know any other way to reach out to them. And I think Richard responded or something. And then Greg called me, and we just were chatting for about a year. It was really about a year, and it just was like a very good point where I felt like we knew each other pretty well. And so we invested.
And you mentioned Union Square as a thesis-driven
Yes.
firm. Why is that, and what is your thesis right now?
So I think about it that there's usually like a couple ways of venture firm, different focal points venture firms can apply to make their investments. So for example, some firms are focused on geography only, right? So investments in India, or investments in San Francisco, or investments in Austin, Texas. And some firms are focused on stage, really early stage or really late stage. Our approach is, we call it thesis driven, but it really starts with, we have a view of why we think the internet is both important and also can lead to businesses that could transform the industries they're in and be competitive over long periods of time. And ultimately the underpinning of that thesis is that the technical structure of the internet is a network, and so that network that has network effects, and so there are businesses that operate like networks and have network effects and can be defensible. So we invest against that thesis, and over the 10-year period, we interpret that thesis in different ways over different periods of time, but ultimately it's an attempt to identify companies that are networks, that have a networked approach. Figure One, for example, is a network approach. It's a thin piece of software that sits on a mobile device that connects medical professionals all around the world, so it's kind of distributed or decentralized that way. But we look for businesses that have those types of characteristics.
But you have changed your thesis over time, or you've refined it a little bit?
Yeah, we've interpreted what a network or what a network effect may be differently over time. We're constantly evaluating what we think about our thesis and where we think our thesis makes sense or doesn't make sense, and what companies may apply to that or not. So for the first, I guess about 5 or 6 or 7 years, the existence of Union Square Ventures, one of the big categories of things we invested in were very broad-based consumer networks. Greg mentioned Twitter, there's Tumblr, there's Foursquare, SoundCloud, a bunch of others that are very, services that were designed for a large proportion of people in the world to use potentially. And then since then we've refined it. It's much more competitive, and it's unclear to us how a broad-based consumer network would gain traction and competitive advantage. So we've taken the network thesis and we've refined it a bit. So we look for things now like what we call market-specific networks, which is actually Figure One. It's a service for medical professionals. Or things called enabling services, which are a layer of services that every web business, which is every business today, can and should use or may need to use. Those are kind of two different takes on the network thesis, as opposed to the large, broad-based consumer platforms.
So you find a company that fits your thesis. Where do you go from there? How do you evaluate whether that specific company, management team have what it takes to succeed?
Well, that's the secret. I can't tell you that. We'd be left
You can tell us.
We'd be left with
we
nothing.
won't tell anyone, right?
I tell you, but now you're not going to find it that interesting, because it's you know, we invest in early stages, and so at the early stage, every company has an existential. It contains an existential threat. They may not survive. So part of it is objective, pattern recognition, what we've seen work. Part of it is trying to evaluate, some attributes you see in an entrepreneur, and then some of it's like, it's more subjective. It doesn't may have less of a rational basis. It may be a little bit of a gut feel. It may be a little bit of a hunch. It may be, when we invested in Figure One, one of the processes we were going through is we had identified healthcare and medicine as an industry that parts of it had not yet been transformed by the connective potential of the internet, and that felt like a big gap for us. So we were looking at a lot of medicine or health-related companies, and so when Figure One kind of popped up, we're like, yeah, lots of risks. I mean, can you really get all the medical professionals in the world to use this app, with this small little team in Toronto? Maybe, maybe not, but it fits something that we thought should exist that was consistent with our thesis. And then you kind of take, we're taking the investment risk. So a little bit like of objective, rational basis, and it's a little bit of subjective, this is the way we think the world will be or should be, and this is a company that fits in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then once you've decided you're interested in a company, how involved are you and is your team in the actual running of the operation?
Well, so we're active investors. We don't really have a passive mode, which is not to say that's better. One is better than the other. There are different approaches. Our approach is active, so we don't make many investments. We make 8 to 10 investments a year, and there's 5 partners and 2 associates. So it's not, we don't do high volume, so we're pretty considerate about it. So we make few investments and we're active. I think we like that style. I think we potentially have a lot to offer the companies, and the best way to do that is to be an active investor. So we always, we almost always take board seats where we're active on a board level. We're very active with management, so we're active. But that means as active as they want us to be, we'll be. We think we have things to offer, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't know what we're talking about.
What? Really?
Yeah, exactly. A lot more than you'd think. Look, if we were smart enough to start Figure One, we would have started it. But we're not, so we didn't. Right?
I mean, you say you
Seriously.
have some secrets in identifying companies, or but there must be something there. You've identified, your firm has identified a lot of companies that have turned out to be unicorns or market-leading firms well ahead of their time. So there must be something you're seeing that other investors are not seeing.
We think, if there is that, we think it's the thesis. We think the thesis is a view, excuse me, it's the whiskey, is a view of, we think the thesis is a view of one way in which the internet is important and transformational. And so when we make the right bets, the right investments, some of them turn out to be correct. And so the thing about us is actually kind of funny. It's actually not a secret because we freaking publish everything we think, right? And whether it's, Jonathan is there, he publishes 5 times a week in his blog. My partner Fred writes every day. People are like, what are you guys looking at USV? I'm like, just read the blogs. It's literally all there.
I think it's interesting that, don't you think sometimes you should be proprietary, or you should not share your ideas?
No.
Could I just be a venture firm and rip off all your ideas by reading your Twitter feed?
Go for it. Yeah. So I would say a couple things. One is hiding in plain sight is a really good tactic, right? Because people don't actually think that. But I think it's not our ideas. There's no primary belief that the ideas we may have are actually correct. They're just ideas. The feedback loop is what may make them interesting ideas, and there's no feedback loop unless you throw them out to the world and we get it back, right? And so that's the conversational process that we think gives us the ability to potentially, over time, make more good investments than bad investments. But keeping it inside means there's 7 people that are talking about it, 7 random people sitting in an office in New York, opining about the internet, which connects everyone in the world. Doesn't seem like it's the best way. And so we think out loud. The things that we write and the things that we publish and the things that we say, we get feedback and we learn a little more and then we spit it out again and people come back at us and we refine our ideas that way. That's, I think that's like, when USV started, its website was a blog, which it seems incredibly anachronistic right now, but in 2004, it was pretty different, right? To have a website of an investment firm that was publishing continually as a blog. And part of it, the idea was that it was a conversation. We're having a conversation with the world that will lead us 8 to 10 times a year to make investments. And I think that's worked out okay, so we continue to do it. And we challenge ourselves to do it more because, again, ideas are just, they're right, they're wrong. How are we going to know if we're just talking to ourselves?
And obviously you've had a lot of successes, but are there some times when you look back at an old blog post or an old investment or something you thought would come into fruition and you've been totally wrong?
Just today, you mean? Every day, yeah. But that's okay. It's like continuous. It's like data points. What happened? You look at a company and say, what went wrong with that company, right? Did we have a wrong assumption, an incorrect assumption? Was there some way they executed that was wrong? Did we evaluate someone or something the wrong way? And how can we learn the next time? We're constantly doing that, right? What does this remind us of? What's the pattern that we've seen? And then is that pattern positive or negative? We're constantly doing that. So we have in our office, we have this box of cereal, right? The Arab, right? Obama O's, right? There's the guys that came into USV many years ago that had this idea that, you can rent out your couch and people will sleep on your couch, right? And we're like, no way, fucking way. People are not going to sleep on someone's couch, right? It's crazy, right? We put our cultural bias on it, and that went on to become Airbnb. So that box sits there in our conference room, you can't come into USV and not see that box, and it's like this dagger, But it's more than that, because it's what's the lesson, right? What's the lesson from that for us that can help us invest? And the lesson for that is, don't place our cultural assumptions of the world are not valid investment criteria. So let's not try to make that mistake again. And we'll make it again, but it's a reminder of it.
Are there other things that have surprised you, trends over the last few years that you just didn't see coming?
I think I think about it in a little different way. I started working in the internet business in 1996, so I have now officially dated myself. I'll guess how old I am. And I think that it was like a little club back then, but I remember, and I worked at AOL, and I remember there were times then where you could see the internet and you're like, fuck, this changes everything. This really changes everything, this power of connectivity and software. And then it took a while where, it took 10 years from 96 to 2006 where it advanced incrementally, but it was still that thing over there, right? Around 10 years ago, there was still old media and new media. These terms seem so quaint, right? Because it's just internet media right now. But then about 10 years ago, it blew apart, right? And there was no old and new and digital and non-digital. Everything became digital. So one of the things that surprised me was that the advancements were slow, and then they took over everything, right? So I think that's one of the ways I think about it. I think that the growth of mobile devices from being adjunct devices to being a primary device, how fast that happened has been kind of interesting. I don't know if it's surprising, but it's been interesting how it's gone from I have a computer and I have a laptop, I have a computer and I have a mobile device to you just have mobile devices now, or there's a generation that maybe is just having those. Mm-hmm. So things like that. And then there's stuff that we don't think is going to work and works, or things that we think will work and doesn't work. I mean, we're in a world of uncertainty, which means we get surprised all the time.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been in the internet space for a long time. How did you end up at Union Square?
I had my company that I started was partially a thesis-driven company, and we invested a lot based on a thesis that was very similar to the USV thesis, and so we had basically co-invested with the USV on Twitter and Kickstarter and Tumblr and a bunch of other things, some things that didn't work as well. So it was pretty intimate with the style, and then the time was just right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some topics that are happening right now in the tech and startup space. One is the valuation issue. So there's been a lot of chatter. Are tech companies overvalued, or have they already started dropping? What do you think about that?
I think it's hard to answer. I think that valuation is just a marker for a point in time on which someone who's selling something has a value they ascribe to it, and someone who wants to buy something, has a value that they ascribe to it. So I don't think about it as having any more importance than that. However, we were in a board meeting earlier today, and someone and one of the team members put up this chart of something that happened on Figure 1 and all the people around the world that had interacted with it. And it blew my mind, because it's a map of the world, and there's people in like every country, a Figure 1 user, every country who had interacted with this Grand Rounds event. Even like, we're looking at like Micronesia and Sri Lanka, and I mean, it just was amazing. And I sit there and I say, we couldn't conceive of that 5 years ago. It just wasn't, we didn't have the brain cells to conceive of that. Yet now it's possible. There is some medical professional in Micronesia, and I'm like a provincial New Yorker. I don't even know where Micronesia is, right? I have no idea. Somewhere by Australia, right? That was interacting with this event on Figure 1. What is the value of that to the world? A lot, right? So, trillions, billions, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But at a moment in time, as an investment firm, I think I have a value of it, the value I put on it. At a moment in time, Josh Landy, the founder, has a value he puts on it, and those meet, and he sells me some stock, and I buy some stock, and we hope we're right.
Sometimes people can get all excited. There's a group thing.
Absolutely,
and sometimes things can soar. So some people are saying
always.
Valuations are already dropping. Do you think there's going to be a pullback?
Yes, maybe, probably. I don't think it's a bad thing, but the same way that I'm not sure the rise in valuations is necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing, It's just a moment in time that I think,
noise, right?
yeah, it can be noise. I mean, it's important to the participants when it happens. It's largely irrelevant to more important issues later, which is, I'm an investor. I have to get money out, right? So I have to get liquid. And so the price when I get liquid is meaningful to me relative to the price I paid for it, and for the founders and the employees and all that kind of stuff. That matters, right? But it's not really where you start, it's where you end in life and in companies that matter. So it's just kind of blips, and those blips are based on supply and demand. And sometimes there's more people that want to invest in these startups than there is startups to invest in, and maybe now it's going to be the opposite. I don't think it really matters. Right? When I started BetaWorks in 2006 or 2007, I mean, we talked to 50 investors. Everyone we talked to. It was really freaking hard. We talked to USV. We pitched USV again and again. We couldn't get them to invest. And that was like the beginning. That was the beginning of the cycle. Yeah, and I had it up there, right? You wouldn't invest in my company, but so that was a different point in the cycle. It just happens. If you take a long view, things kind of even out, right?
But does it mean that companies should be trying to conserve cash, that it might be a while before they can get their next rounds?
Yes, at some level. Yeah, at some level you have your strategy and your tactics, and one of your tactics is what's the cost of capital and what's my ease of getting capital. And if you think it's more expensive or going to be more difficult, you should be more rational with it. There's probably an argument to be made you should be more rational with it all the time, but when capital is easy and it's cheap, you act differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another issue I hear a lot about from people I'm talking to is this whole issue about talent shortage. I don't know how it is in New York, but probably it's the same everywhere to a certain extent. A lot of startups feel that they can't grow as fast as they would like to. They need to find the right people, and that's hard. What do you think about that? Is there any solution to that in terms of what VCs can do and what companies can do to grow talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's probably happened is that, if you go back 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, there's a cohort of people who would look at Figure 1 and they'd be like, this is a startup, they need their investors for money, and if I look at their cash position, they're going to be out in 46 months, and that's really risky. I'm going to go work at RBC or whatever, right? And Mom, I'm going to go to a startup, right? What's that, right? But that's changed, right? That's like, RBC is no less risky than Figure 1, we've learned, coming out of the last financial crisis. But also, people are looking at these startups and they're saying, that's actually where I want to learn there and I want to grow there, and they're much better environments. So you have more people that want to participate in it, but at the same time, if you think like the modern era of the internet is like 10 years old, I was talking to someone about that with you, right? So the number of people that have experience going back is limited, so you've got a tight labor market. The way I think about it is that a core competency of a company has to be recruiting and the ability to recruit. No successful company has ever done it if they can't attract good people regularly and continuously. Our partner Albert has this thing which is, what does he call it? It's not the ABCs, it's the always be recruiting, right? Like you're always recruiting, whether you're hiring or not, you're always recruiting. So we can help, right? We can look at you like, what are we talking about? So you have to do it, and you have to do it well. And there's some things we've seen, that we can kind of help and give advice, and we're good at helping recruit people and try and convince them why this company is good for them to take a career risk or something like that. But companies have to get good at it. You just have to, and it's if you don't, you're not going to be able to grow. And so ultimately, that's the way I think. You got to make a commitment to it. You got to invest in it. You got to get better at it.
Is there more that could be done from companies and VCs to get more diverse candidates, more women joining the field?
Always. Yeah, I think we probably all pretty much sucked on that basis, so there's always more, So, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of these companies that Union Square had stakes in or had invested in early on. I mean, Twitter was mentioned off the top. Big success story for you. They seem to be hitting a bit of a rough patch, or are they right now?
How many people today use Twitter? I wish in my life I have that rough patch where a random group of people, 85 people, will use my product.
I guess it's about revenues, though. It's not just about users, right?
What's their revenue supposed to be this year? $3 billion? For a company that's 7 years old? I wish I had that problem too.
So why do we hear so much negative things about Twitter?
Because Twitter is the feedback loop of the world, right? Like negative, people are like, Twitter sucks, and they say it on Twitter, right? Right? No, it's a crazy thing. It's a craziest thing. Like, how do you explain? No, it's almost like it's like the truth serum, right? Yeah, or the complaint board, or the boasting board, or the whatever board. Companies have ups and downs. I don't know, is Twitter in a down cycle? Maybe people think so, but that's what happens. Competition is tough. It's a super competitive environment, right? Twitter is vying for people's attention, and my attention could be on your newspaper, it could be on Facebook, it could be on Figure One. It's really competitive. There's a million other services. Right back in the day, there was 5 TV channels and 2 newspapers in every city, so there was under 10 places to place your attention. Now there's 10 new apps today that have come out. So it's a competitive environment, but it's woven into the fabric of our lives. And so I don't think, if it's hitting a low point, it'll be fine.
You think it'll be bad?
Yeah, I think it's one of the iconic services, and I think the fact that everyone here used it today or consumed it in one way or the other is pretty indicative of that.
Do you think Facebook is still going to be as dominant going forward as it is today? Do you see any change in that going forward?
What do you think?
Yeah.
The company executes really well. The company that seems to be a model for risky, aggressive execution. And so will it be? Who knows, right? That's what makes it kind of fun. Who knows what the world's going to be like, right? Snapchat is 4 years old, So what's the next thing? The cycle is super competitive, which is great. So it's hard to predict. Looks like it's a company that is and will continue to be iconic, though.
Looks like it uses its market. Once you get to be a certain size, you use your market position to dominate related spheres. Right?
Yeah.
What about Uber? What do you think about that? Are they going to be like the transportation company going forward, or are they just a forerunner for changes we're going to see?
That's a hard one to answer, isn't it? I keep looking at Jonathan for support. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Jonathan says yes. Yeah. Know what I said? It's our partner Fred said something to us the other day, which is there's this. We debate a lot about to try and get better at what we do. We look at companies and we try and discuss or debate what's defensible about them to help answer that question, right? Will X company be around in 5 years? Try and say, well, what's defensible about the service, right? And so you could sit there and say, well, it's offering just a commodity, right? So it's not defensible. It's Uber, it's Lyft, it's Subway. They're all interchangeable. And our partner Fred said something to us, which is that, the thing with the device, you think about with the device, you know, we use a thumb, you know, to do something. It's all we need is the thumb, right? You move the thumb, you know, a couple places, and you get muscle memory in that thumb, and that muscle memory may actually be defensible. The muscle memory of opening up an app, choosing the car, getting in it, and riding, you know, and that may be defensible. So the answer to your question may be, yeah, that's a pretty defensible business because that muscle memory, once something goes on your front, you know, page of your mobile device, usually doesn't, you know, you don't really usually move it off. You usually don't add new things there, too.
I guess
So.
in a way it's like a network of
Yeah.
people, right? Of the drivers, of everybody
Could be.
coming together.
It could be.
You tell me.
It could be. Yeah, we debate that. We don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes we say yes, sometimes we say no.
And what about SoundCloud? That is one of your companies.
Yeah.
Doing
That's
well
awesome.
in the music space.
Yeah.
Are they competitive with Spotify? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, on some level, yes, and on some level, no, right? Large, you know, SoundCloud is much more user generated, right? You and I could go and play our guitars in the green room back there and upload it to SoundCloud and then come out here and now we've published to the world. That's a very different model than Spotify and offers a very different experience and a very different proposition for the user because it's not just a consumption platform, it's a publishing platform as well. So at some level, yeah, it competes. In some level, it's very different that way. And the power in it for us as an investor versus a Spotify, which is a great service, I'm a Spotify subscriber, most of the people on the show are, is that it was a publishing platform and a platform for users to publish, you know, and empower themselves by being able to publish directly without anyone in the middle. That's the thing that we think that's one of the things that makes it really defensible. It's not just offering music for $5 a month or whatever. It's the power of it being a publishing platform without any gatekeeper there at all. So, yeah.
And talk about publishing platforms. Tumblr was one of your investments, right?
Yeah. That's cool.
And what's happening with Tumblr now is sold to Yahoo, right?
Yes.
And what do you see them doing with it? How has that gone in your mind?
Well, what I read is it's not going well, but I don't.
I don't know anymore.
Yeah, you know, who knows what you believe? No, so I don't know. Tumblr is amazing, was and continues to be an amazing self-publishing platform that I think at some level was and maybe still is very misunderstood, right? Tumblr is a network of a lot of other niche networks. So it looks very different, and then it has its own internal distribution mechanism. So for example, one of my favorite, there's a Tumblr that I follow that is really interesting, and so it's just people that have published pictures. So there's a thing like, does anyone have a Harry Potter tattoo in this room? Does anyone know about these things? So there's a thing, right? There are people that take quotes from Harry Potter and get tattoos, and there's you know about it, right? So you shook your head, right? It's a great idea, right? And so there's a Tumblr where people send in their pictures of their Harry Potter tattoos. It's called like harrypottertattoos.tumblr.com or something like that, right? So, and my point is that Tumblr is like hundreds of thousands or millions of little networks like that, and I feel like it's very important in the world for those people to express them, so whether it's the Harry Potter tattoos or whatever else it may be, to express themselves in their niche community cohort and find community and self-expression in that. And I don't know many other platforms other than Tumblr that allow that. So to me, that feels very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Foursquare, is that still one of your
Yeah.
companies?
Yeah.
So they had kind of they're split into two
Yeah.
apps, right? And
Yeah.
how is that working out for you?
I think it's working out great. I think Foursquare is also a misunderstood company in many ways because I'll do another parlor trick. How many people use the map on their phones today? Like almost everyone, right? And some large portion of you used it to find a place, you know, the figure one address or the place you had lunch. So that's a huge database of places in the world that need to be continually fed into the maps that we all use on our phones every day. And Foursquare is one of the great data providers for that. That feels like that's really valuable. And they got there through a trick. They got there not by saying we're going to build the database, by building a really incredibly fun app to allow people to check in, and when they check in, they'll say the name and the address of the place they'll check in, and sometimes they'll say, hey, the Wi-Fi password in figure one is this, or don't get the coffee here, or whatever, and now you have this interesting database of places that has been user-generated. It feels really powerful and really cool, and I do think the Swarm app they have now is one of the best apps in the world, design-wise. It's just my view.
And what about the other Canadian investments, Wattpad?
Wattpad, right? Wattpad. Think about Wattpad. Wattpad is, God, Alan would kill me for saying this, but Wattpad came out of this idea of, right, of fan fiction, right? Is that we consume media, but in the internet era, we don't want to consume it. We actually want to create it and recreate it, right? So Wattpad is crazy. You go to Wattpad and type in the Hunger Games, and there's like 5 million recreations of the Hunger Game books that people have written in their own voice with their own take on it, where they change the plot, they change what happens to the characters. It's an incredible platform for self-expression, but also for this idea that we're not passive consumers. We kind of take ownership, we take agency over the things, over the media that's interesting to us, and we recreate it in our own voices. And Wattpad has captured that unlike any other app. And so it's a great company, great service.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to what you were saying before about there's all these different communities out there. You can't use your own lens necessarily to discount things.
Totally.
Right? So how do you understand, like, I think Wattpad is a young audience, or Kick has a very young audience. Like, how do you sort of understand that space if you're not part of that community?
Well, by not trying to understand the space, but by trying to understand the capabilities that a service may provide. And so we don't need to understand the world of Hunger Games fan fiction, although we may like it, some of us, maybe. But we need to understand the power in enabling that, and the power of the internet, that someone who is interested in that in Toronto connects with someone who's interested in that in Manila, in the Philippines, because that's what happens. That's what we'll look for. We don't need to know about what happens in that fan fiction world. But we'd like to know that here's a service that enables this activity that then enables that connection to occur.
It's more
Feels like
about
that's
the
what the internet.
network than the content.
Yeah, totally. The content, people love the content, but the content is a piece, right? Is what's enabled by the network.
Okay.
That's what we'll look for.
And Kick is trying to build itself into kind of a platform similar to Facebook. How do you see that going?
Well, it's clear. I mean, how many people use some messenger app today? Yeah, these are easy questions, right? Everyone, right? Some messenger app you used, and Kick is a messenger app. Messenger, it feels like the combination of mobile devices plus messengers is a primary use case for human beings. And so Kick fills a niche as a specific way of providing that functionality. And it's pretty big.
Yeah.
And so it needs to kind of find its way versus the others, right? Everyone has a different way they capture it, and they have a certain way of doing it. So
you've got the Canadian investments, the
Yeah.
US ones. Do you invest in other companies as well, or other countries as well?
we invest 1/3 of our investments are in New York, 1/3 are in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and 1/3 is everywhere else. And in the everywhere else is Canada. There are other, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, other places in the United States, and then the largest portion of that other third is companies in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to take some questions. Hopefully some people have things they would like to say. I see someone. Oh,
Do I pick or you pick?
you pick. You're going to be the one answering. So you.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys think about virtual reality in that space, and I don't know, some of the networks and tools you see coming up over the next few years?
So that's a good question because I don't have a firm answer to it. We don't for us and our thesis, I don't think yet we have firm opinions on it, and thus we haven't made any investments. There's some of us that have firmer opinions. There are others of us that think we should never invest in it. And so we haven't yet figured out a way that we as an investor can participate in that. The only thing I will add is that I sometimes struggle with figuring out how something can become the next big thing before it's even a thing. And so that's like, I don't, which is not to say it won't, I just don't know how, right? Like Facebook was a way to connect kids in college. And it became that thing, and then from there it became kind of this connective tissue or whatever, right? So I'm trying to look for the analogy with that. When everyone in the world says it's the next big thing, I don't know. Maybe we'll find it. But we just don't know really. I don't think we know specifically where to look that would be relevant, that we could be good investors for. I know you.
Sure. Andy, you talked in the beginning about the thesis kind of changing from broad consumer networks to more segment-based niche networks. Does that change your risk and valuation expectations for those companies as well? Are you looking for, I guess, like to use the baseball analogy, more singles and less home runs?
So it's a really, really good question. I think the economics of our business don't really work without home runs. They just don't. And so with the size of fund we are, the amounts we have to return require really large exit. And so the short answer is no. We don't think that the word niche implies small, to me, sometimes small or of lesser value. We actually think some of the market-specific networks, Figure 1, for example, could even be higher value because putting a tight cohort of users together who are similarly situated maybe can be more valuable, or valuable in a different way, but an equally large way as a broad network that, where the value per user is pennies. Right? The thesis for something like Figure 1 or some of the other market-specific networks is the value per user, however you define it, is going to be huge because it's all the medical professionals. So, yeah.
What are the qualities that you look for in founders? We talked a lot about companies, but
Yep.
founders, and maybe you can speak about Figure 1 specifically in that context as well.
And how great the founders are.
What's that?
And how great the founders are.
Yeah.
What do you really see your question?
What I really think. Yeah, I think, I think to a large extent, it's a founder or founders that in some way have experienced the problems for which they want to create a solution for. And whether they defined it as problems or just something that was happening, that's a big one for us, like I saw, so we have another company called Science Exchange, which is a marketplace for scientific experiments. You could go order DNA analysis on the marketplace and choose from 10 providers today. And the founder was had the potential to become one of the leading cancer researchers in the world earlier in her career. And she was very frustrated by the idea that you had labs all around the world that had very specific core competencies, and she couldn't access to them. It frustrated her in doing her research, so she created this business. We think that's important because you just understand a little better the problem you want to solve. And so that's kind of an attribute, I think, that resonates a lot with us. It's not always the case, but that is one that resonates. The Figure 1 founders we just didn't like, but we still got over it.
Sorry, do you mind if I just follow on that? In terms of is there an obsessiveness, and is there any kind of through line? Obviously, you need, a work ethic is important. You need to know that these people are going to follow through and be serious. Could you speak to that side of things at all?
I mean, I guess the answer is yes, but I'm not sure how to evaluate it. I mean, you can, you have a conversation with someone and you can tell they're passionate about something, so part of it's that, and in having that dialogue, kind of the passion. It's hard to evaluate, ultimately whether someone's going to work hard enough to achieve that or not. I think that's one of the risks we take. We try and do our best, but usually when you've experienced, here, I'll give you another example, a company that that we're investors in called Circle Up, which is a marketplace for equity investments in consumer product companies. And the two founders were actually in the private equity world investing in consumer product companies. And they were like, God, every day we see these early stage consumer product companies and they can't freaking raise money. Yet all these software, all these dumb mobile app companies can. That doesn't make sense. Let's create a marketplace, And they were just obsessive about it because they saw it. I think that mattered. I think it's hard to evaluate the other stuff. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. One of my partners once said to me, you never really know for a year into a relationship whether you've made the right choice on that relationship. And so that's just kind of one of the risk factors that come in. Sometimes we don't have a lot of time to make. I mean, Figure 1 was kind of an outlier because I think Greg and I had about a year to get to know each other. And it was not just about Figure 1, it was about who we were as people. We would chat about journalism or whatever, right? And sometimes we have a week. And so, we have to operate in both those modes and try and make, the best educated guess. And so, but we do try and say like, oh, this, Dr. Landy reminds us of so-and-so, right? There's some attribute, that they have, I can't tell you.
When you say, in the case of Greg and Figure 1, you had a year, in some cases you have a week, what drives your investment timelines?
It's the company. It's usually not up to us, right? So I met, when I'll use Figure One as an example, I had met you guys very early on. It was, and which was generally too early. We usually invest early, but not, right at launch, a little bit after. And then you raised the seed round with some people that are in the room. And so you didn't need money for a year, and so it was getting close to the time that you were going to think about raising money, and we kept in touch, so it was a good entry point for us. So it's really driven by the company. There are times a company will say, "I'm closing in a week. Can you participate?" And we're like, "We just can't decide in a week. It's just too fast." But then sometimes we're like, "Maybe we can." So it's not usually up to us. We'd love to have more time rather than less time, but we don't choose. You'll go next.
What's the fastest you've gone from hearing about a company to investing in?
That is a great question. That is a great question.
This one. Another one.
Yeah.
It's not announced.
Wow. Do you know?
I'm trying to think right now.
Yeah, that's so when we first heard about it to when we invested.
I thought that was clarified. I don't know how long it was.
Yeah, so there was a company that was maybe 2 weeks, maybe a couple weeks from when we first heard about it, and so that is it. I have to think about that a little more. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I'd love to answer that. Yeah.
Including the capital call?
No. We make a commitment to invest, and then we get our money from our investors. So, but we've never not. When we made that commitment, Roger, we only have our reputation. Seriously. So that's a good question.
If you had to choose one or two startups in your portfolio that are also not big names like Twitter or Kickstarter, and also had the highest potential, which ones would they be and why?
Well, I mean, remember, we love all our companies. No, we do. We really do. I'll give you a non-answer.
Don't say Figure One.
And we'll see if you're satisfied. So you think about two phases in Unit Square Ventures. Phase one was we invested in large networks of engaged users, and largely it happened to be the case that the large networks were really defensible because they had very strong network effects. So in phase two, we sit there and say, well, if that's the case, what can undermine network effects? And so one of the reasons that they're really defensible is that they centralize some of the data. They centralize user data, the friend graph. They centralize transaction data. They centralize reputation data. So we're like, well, what will supplant those strong network effects, strong centralized data? Well, a technology that is a decentralized data store, blockchain. And so we invested in a bunch of blockchain companies that we think have enormous potential because of that, because their ability to supplant the centralized networks and the network effects, but it's really early and they haven't done that yet. But we think they have the potential to.
So what are the 2 to 3 key learnings you've taken from your time as an EC and applied to
That you don't really know anything at any point in time. It's a lot, and that the corollary to me is that outcomes are more random than you would think based on the process you have going in. They're just.
And I guess I should have said shared with Figure One as part of your role there.
It's all random, buddy. No, it's that. Yeah, is that that is part of it. Is that I think that you can. Jonathan and I were talking about this. The world is so connected, and software makes us so connected, and therefore the competitive dynamic for any startup is so competitive that you can sometimes overthink or overanalyze, and that gets in the way of rapid action. And so the thing that we get worried about for our companies is someone's going to come up with some twist of it that we didn't get to first, that we didn't see, and just blows up, because we've seen it happen before, right? And so what's the right balance between rational, good, detailed analysis and instinctual, continual iteration? It's really hard to find that balance, but you know, between being an expert and being a beginner. So.
So I was talking to Jonathan about the messaging space a little earlier. I'd love to get your thoughts on that space, what opportunities you see, and if you guys have already started investing.
Well, through Kik, it feels to us that one of the things we've learned is that messaging on a mobile, when I was at AOL in the mid to late 90s, one of the things we kind of would look at how people were using the service, and they were using, no matter what we layered in, they were using email, and they were chatting, and they were using AOL Instant Messenger. So we spun out AOL Instant Messenger as a separate download outside of the AOL network, and the usage was crazy usage, and then AOL bought ICQ, which was a competing one. My point being, when you marry messaging capabilities with the mobile device, it feels like that is a primary interface way for people to communicate. They just do it. It's easy, it's natural, it's native, right? Kik may not be the biggest messenger, but it still has tens and tens of millions of users, you know, as like number 5, right? And people will use Kik and they'll use Facebook Messenger. So feels like it's a primary communication mode. So then the question is, does that mean other services get layered through messaging or not? Maybe. We have a notion that maybe that's the case. We don't really have a notion yet specifically on what they may be or where there may be investment activities, but we're spending a lot of time thinking about it and looking at lots of things in that space to figure out, is messaging simply kind of friend messaging, or is there something more? Is there another turn? Are they platforms? Don't know. We have some evidence to suggest maybe, but it hasn't fully happened yet. So.
You talked about a company blowing up, being a really attractive thing to invest within maybe 2 weeks. Does it matter how long the company was on the market to determine whether they're a fast grower or not? Like, let's say a company's like 10 years in the market, and then suddenly the last 2 weeks they get most of their growth, versus a company that just came out in the App Store is getting all the growth.
Yes. So there was a company that we were super aggressively pursuing in the middle of their fundraising process, and their growth curve was crazy, right? As good as we've ever seen. And we tried to invest, and we broke a lot of our rules. We don't have rules, right? We broke a lot of things we tried to do in making the investment. So, for example, maybe not all of us had met the company. The offer we made, you know what I'm talking about. The offer we made was at a way higher price than we normally would, and we didn't win the deal. We lost the deal to another firm. And then in the year since, it had only a couple months of usage. So the growth chart was like that over, 6 months. And last year it's kind of gone down. Now, maybe it'll go back up or not. But we struggle with, do we have enough data to make a reasoned determination and therefore want to be aggressive? I think that for us, when we invest in short periods of time, we try not to do that because of that reason. We try not to chase a trend because we don't know what will happen. We try and find other attributes that will lead us to move really quickly as an investment other than that. But sometimes we do it, and sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're wrong.
Almost sounds like the stock market.
Yeah, kind of.
Buying on the climb, maybe it's still.
It could be. Maybe. It could be, yeah. It could be. But you just don't know. Also, right? We look at, if you look at the Snapchat growth chart in the App Store, is one of the beautiful charts to look at in all time, because that was one where it went up and has never gone down. So that could happen, right? Yes. Like part of it, we're driven by fear of missing out too, and it could be that long. But we try not to. We try not to chase that because you just don't know.
Yeah. So you seem pretty firm in your investment strategy that you go 1/3 San Francisco, 1/3 to New York, 1/3 everywhere else. So my question for you is, what is it about those ecosystems that make them so attractive as is it just you like to go to California or?
Right. Yeah. I think that those we don't design it to be in those ratios. We've retroactively analyzed it, so it's just happened that way. I think for a long period of time we had over 50% in New York, and then if you look at the ratios, I like to look at the ratios as a way to, after the fact, kind of tease out what we think about the world versus kind of going into it prospectively. And so it's more like, we'll invest in anywhere in the world we can get to in a day. So that's San Francisco over here and Berlin, on the other side, right? And we're kind of bound by that. Like, we got to get to the company tomorrow for some reason. We can be able to get. So there's a geographical constraint, and then the mix changes over time. I think our part of our roots were in New York City, and we were one of the early funds in New York City. And then New York City is a great place to invest, so there are more funds, and so we couldn't win any deal. You know, like San Francisco, we can win any deal we chase, but we got to be there more. And then I think we had early on, we had a bunch of companies in Europe, so therefore we were there more, and therefore we met more people and started to build networks there. The thing about some of the European companies that we found recently is that because they operate in small markets, we invested in a company who announced it's in Estonia or one in Finland. They have to take a global view from day one. There's no other way for them to build a big business without a global view versus you can just be a US only business and be huge. So we kind of like that. We find that kind of interesting, and maybe that's why we've invested more in European companies. But I think it's like that in a combination of we're there a lot, so we meet people. And so the ratio could change, yeah. Okay.
I'll follow up. So I guess if you're looking at like figure one, great idea on the ground. Like how important is the city? I mean, we talked about talent drain earlier.
Yeah.
Like recruiting is difficult. How important is it for the startup to be in an environment where they can pull on mentors, they can find financing, talent, and like what is it about San Francisco and New York that cultivate these startups at a rate that maybe Toronto hasn't gotten to yet?
Well, I don't know if Toronto has gotten there, but I will say that what some of the attributes of a healthy ecosystem, right, are ones that take all the friction out of running a business, or take as much out of it as possible. Finding people, finding investors, finding mentors, finding advisors, all those things. And so the Valley is taken that, is perfected. Like I go to San Francisco, I'll meet a friend, and he or she has already started another company before they've left the first company, right? Like crap like that happens all the time. That's to like the extreme. New York isn't that mature, but is mature enough where it's happening. And then I think all it takes is a couple, good companies that people, you work at Shopify for a couple of years, and you're really good at e-commerce marketing. So you go back in, you start something, you go back to another company, you bring a level extra. So it's like that stuff just kind of needs time to fill out. The thing I would say though is that we have some companies that are in smaller cities that you wouldn't think of as having an ecosystem, and the dynamic sometimes is they can be big fish in small ponds, and that can work. And you can get up to like a scale of team really quickly if you're a leading mobile app company that's located in Pittsburgh or Kansas City. These are real examples. Or Dwala, which started in Des Moines, Iowa. So it can work both ways. So,
How are we for time? Maybe just one.
I think that says wrap up.
That's the end then.
There was another question.
Let's take one more.
There was
question.
something I saw somewhere. The light. Behind the
So
light.
maybe this is ending on a downer, but when you've got an investment that is not working, how do you decide it's time to stop? And that could be, maybe you can't take your money out, but you're an active player here, so you're spending time too. How do you decide it's time to stop this?
So, I mean, the reason it's not a downer question is that there's a large percentage of our investments that don't work out. Maybe a third don't work out, or a third to a half. So it's just part of it. It's the occupational hazard. I mean, it's not, the way we think about it is we're a services business. Our job is to provide service to the entrepreneurs and the companies that we invest in. It's not our choice to not provide that service. It's what we do. To the point that there's an exit. So a company gets sold, it doesn't work, or whatever. We're with it. Our style, at least, is, and most VCs, but our style in particular is one we work with it to the very end. Now there may be patterns that we recognize that we can suggest or recommend they think about a particular course, but we're with them to the end, and we spend a lot of time on things that don't work out. But again, that's what we think our jobs are, and we think that's extremely important to do, and we think that's what our reputation is built upon. Not just because the reality is the winners, there's not that much to do. It's not. They work, and you can chiropractically adjust them now and then, but we're just observers. The ones that work for whatever set of reasons. They're easy. And so, but you got to work with, you got to work through the ones that may not have that outcome, or they may at points in time look like they don't have them. I'm on the board of a company that called YouNow, which is a live broadcasting mobile app, and it's one of the leading ones in the world. There was a point 2 years ago where it just didn't look like it was working. It was growing, but it was just a little. It wasn't growing very fast, and it was a small team, under 10 people, and it felt like it was kind of you know, in the last third of its life as a company, and there were probably some people that would have acquired it. And they did just a couple different tweaks. They oriented the service to be 100% mobile, and it blew up. So you just don't know. You know, that's the randomness. There's a lot of randomness in that. And so we just got to ride. Our jobs is to work with the companies through all that period. So it only looks like fun and games from the outside.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your questions. They're really excellent questions, and thank you, Andy, for being here tonight. I've learned a lot. I think we've all got a better sense of where things are going in the future. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much to Andy. Special thank you to Sarah, who just kind of came because I cold called her, basically. I appreciate that very much. Thank you all for coming. We will have this Women in Tech panel on March 8th, International Women's Day. We'd love to be back. Thank you.
And we didn't need microphones.
Yeah, actually, I hope everyone, I didn't worry about it.